Hey, Merry Christmas, everybody, and welcome to the Real Talk Christmas bonus episode. On today's show, we have on Mike Hutten from the One Christian Thinks podcast. You can find his podcast and all of our research linked right down below. This podcast ended up going quite a long ways, close to 3 hours, so we decided to split it into two parts to make it easier for you to listen to and enjoy. In the first half, we talk about racism, Black Lives Matter, and how current cultural movements are impacted by ideologies like Marxism, Neo-Marxism, and critical race theory. This is a bit of an experimental episode, and you'll get to hear a little bit more from myself and Tyler as hosts. In this episode, we keep it fairly broad, but the plan going forward is to do more specific deep dives into the current cultural issues of the day, along with Mike. So let us know what you think of the dynamic, what you think of the conversation, and if you like what you heard. Looking forward to hearing from you on that. One quick note before we get into the episode. It's been pretty cool. We're starting to get quite the substantial audience on these interview episodes, with a couple thousand of you tuning in to each one. So the plan is to start some advertising to help grow the podcast. With that in mind, if you're a business owner listening, or if you know a business owner or someone who would benefit from advertising their products or services on Real Talk, please reach out, send us an email, let us know. Be happy to start that process and get you guys going on that. So, apologies for the long introduction. Without further ado, please enjoy part one of the inaugural Real Talk Christmas bonus episode. Hey everybody, we are here doing a bonus episode for you all of Real Talk. Ty, how's it going, man?
Good.
Good? You're doing good?
Hungry. So we got a spread here, so it's good.
Yeah, we if you're watching visually, which is be how you would watch anything, I suppose, we have a very updated studio here. So we got a nice big Real Talk sign. C.S. Lewis here, painter. Yeah, we
introduced everyone to their art before, but
yeah, we did.
Hanging here now,
but not everyone watches the bonus episodes or like the feedback episodes. So
fair.
Yeah. So the studio is coming along. It's pretty sweet. We're kind of happy with it. So once again, thank you, Reform Perspective, for giving us the funding to do that. And
yep, for sure.
Yeah, to keep it going. So yeah, basically today we're kind of trying out something new.
Christmas bonus.
Yeah, we'll call it a Christmas bonus. It's a little, maybe a Christmas present. That. Maybe it's a bit of coal in the stocking. Who knows?
Christmas bonuses.
Yeah. So we're kind of just going to give you guys, some of our thoughts and some of our guest thoughts. So I'll intro in a minute here on the current cultural context we find ourselves in. And that could take could take many forms. We're not quite sure where this conversation will go. And that's kind of the magic of conversation. So, I guess I'll intro today's guest.
Yeah.
We got Mike Hutten on from One Christian Thinks. Ty is a huge fan of their intro song for whatever reason.
Oh, yeah. Dude, I got to cue it up. 1 second.
All right.
See if I can get this. You're going to play it right now?
You'll be fine.
Do you got it? I can give you I can play it off my computer, actually. Oh.
All right.
You want me to do that for you?
Yeah. Where's your mic to it? We're going to make this a half One Christian Thinks podcast episode.
Ty likes to run around the office dancing to the song. So, just give everyone
another shout out to Calvin Hutten. So.
Yeah. Calvin Hutten.
Yeah,
also wrote this.
Sure. Yeah. He did all my editing for that. Here it is.
Yeah.
The cultural appropriation is in the dancing of Tyler.
Yeah. Oh, that was on me? Oh, that's not good.
Nothing.
Yeah, you got the Trump moves there.
Mike have his mic back.
Yeah.
Mike is host and I guess the only voice on One Christian Thinks.
That's right.
But everyone should go check out that podcast too. Mike's got some really good thoughts on our culture and maybe you want to introduce maybe just some of the episodes that are your favorite.
Yeah, I'd be happy if you just left it at thoughts. Really good is a bit of that might be a stretch.
The thoughts are there.
No, that's great.
So what I'm trying to do with my podcast is examine worldview and culture, the different ideologies that culture is operating with from an explicitly Christian perspective.
Yeah.
My target audience is Christians, and I'm trying to target Christians sort of from any denomination, from any faith background. I'm trying to put out kind of a unifying message rather than really picking sides.
Yeah.
Up to this point, I've talked about kind of the two things that were biggest in 2020, that being the Black Lives Matter protests and then also COVID-19. So I've discussed those. I think I've done 9 episodes or something like that. Moving forward, I'm going to be discussing a little bit more just ideas, bigger ideas. So I'm starting a series on freedom, discussing the idea of freedom.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to keep it a little bit out of the philosophy, because the philosophy can get pretty intense.
Oh, okay.
There's some
interesting.
Like throughout church history, it's been discussed. So I try to stay out of that and keep it at a relevant discussion. Got 5 episodes planned. And then I guess the next thing that I'm quite excited about is that there's a book. It's called The Story of Liberty. It's not copyrighted at all anymore. It was written in the 1800s.
Do you even know what copyright was back then?
Apparently it was, but so I've got that book. Because it's in the public domain, I can record myself reading it and put it out there.
Oh, cool.
So I'm hoping in January to start recording myself reading that book and putting out a chapter every day.
Oh, cool.
It's a really, really cool book. It kind of tells church history and European history together, and it really frames kind of everything we learn about in school, just general church history, general European history. It puts it all together and then puts it into a story form as well. It's not a history book. It's a story book. So it's really easy to read. It really grabbed my attention. I'm not a history guy. So I think it'll be valuable for other people to listen to. So I'm really looking forward to doing that as well.
Chapter a day is a lot of work.
Chapter a day.
Good luck with that.
They're not super long chapters. Like I'm talking probably 15, 20 minutes of reading.
Well, I'll be listening.
That's kind of where my podcast is going, but I'm super excited to be here with you guys too.
Yeah. I like listening to your voice. So. No, I really like your podcast that you came at it, like for your first intro episode, you always encourage people to listen to that. So if you're going to listen to One Christian Thinks, go listen to the intro episode first, because Mike lays out a mindset where he's like, I'm just going to be Christian about this and lay it out like from an explicitly Christian perspective. So it's not like you're, debating whether or not it's, something's Christian, or you shy away from actually like debating what Christians would be debating and like just deal with the problems of culture. So, and that's why we have you here. So we're probably going to just roll through a whole bunch of culturally relevant ideas, problems, ideologies that are, eating up our world, and
for sure.
And we'll try not to ramble too long.
Wow, we got Mike, the problem solver, Hutten in the studio. So.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I appreciate it.
We'll get to a few things at least.
Is it stuck in my head now?
Yeah, no, you gotta stop.
I can't even remember what our music sounds like.
It's gonna be a cringe clip right there.
All right, so let's get through it. You want to lay out something?
Well, yeah, I was just thinking like maybe we just ask Mike for a sec. Like, what was we've seen a lot of cultural change in 2020, a lot of upheaval. It's been an interesting year by any measure. So I was just curious, you started your podcast this year. Was there any like one sort of impetus for you starting it, or what was the reason?
Absolutely there was. I had the idea of starting something, whether it was, I consider it a blog, but I settled on podcast. Now, particularly this year, I saw it was first COVID kind of, when it hit, people didn't know what to think. And a lot of people, whether they were in churches or whether it was just general public, they were confused. They didn't know what to think. They didn't know, like it was just confusion. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I saw that, I noted it. I kind of started forming my own ideas about COVID. And then the Black Lives Matter protests, like the Black Lives Matter started protesting after the death of George Floyd, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. And again, Christians just didn't know what to think about it. And so I was like, hey, like I have thoughts. Maybe my thoughts will at least spark conversation. That was kind of my goal, to spark conversation, not tell people what to think, not tell people how to think, but just spark conversation. Right. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I do take stances, and it's not, like, of course, it's my opinion. I do think my opinion is correct. I spend time reasoning.
You would say it otherwise,
Exactly. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. Yeah. But I'm not doing it to try persuade people that I'm correct. I'm doing it to try start a conversation, because these are issues that we really have to discuss. They're super important issues. So that's kind of that was the impetus for starting my podcast.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So when did you get it underway before the Black Lives Matter stuff started?
No, it
Well,
was.
I mean, that's been going on for years, but like, the protest this year.
Primarily this year. So it was shortly after the death of George Floyd. That's when I really started digging into it. Yeah.
Okay. And that's some pretty heated stuff. Like that's even.
Yeah, it is.
It's interesting how much people still care about it or are engaged in it here in Canada still.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know we have some American listeners, and I'm sure they've seen a lot of the media.
Yeah.
Focus on that, and rightfully so. It's a big event, but it's interesting to me how many Canadians are very much engaged on that issue. Like there is a Toronto chapter of Black Lives Matter.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think there's probably a chapter in every big city.
Yeah.
So
Hamilton had some stuff to do.
Yeah.
There was some I don't know, riots maybe, or at least some protests.
I think they wrote BLM on the street in downtown Hamilton.
Didn't they do something with Sir John A. Macdonald's statue too?
Yeah,
I don't know if that was them.
I can't keep track of all the statues that are toppling, but I think there probably was one that came down.
Yeah. What do you make of that trend actually? Because you did an episode on, I haven't listened to it yet. You might have on symbolism.
I listened to all of them.
Yeah,
and Pajot.
So that episode was talking masks, a lot more about COVID.
Okay.
But
the symbolism of all these statues being toppled.
Yeah. So that actually did incorporate into the episode a little bit.
Okay.
That's like, we see a trend that people are trying to rewrite history, which is a very dangerous trend because they're forgetting about the wrongs of history. Because it's almost like they're attempting to kind of deny sin in a way, right? Because they're destroying all the bad aspects of history. But if we do that, then like the saying, like if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it, right?
Yeah, right.
And now it's not just we're not failing to study history; we're destroying history.
But who are these people destroying history, and like why do you think they're doing it? Like, I mean, that's it's a deep question.
They're tearing Sir John A. Macdonald's statue down because he was also sinful. So
because he's considered a racist. That's
because he was a racist.
That's the charge.
Well, I mean, like if you lived back then, okay, we're gonna get like way too quickly into our material here. But
I don't know.
If you lived back then, you're going to be molded by the culture that you lived in, right? So
for sure.
To say that anyone wasn't racist back then, it's like people say everyone's racist now. So it's like, it's obviously if you view that like this way now, then back then it was way worse. We got to shut that down, kind of thing, right?
But it's not just like John A. Macdonald. It's like Winston Churchill too, right?
It's the strangest like characters that they're trying to But I think there's something to that, which is like if you tear down the person that everyone looks up to, they got nothing to look up to. Now the system's crumbled, which is really ultimately, I'm sure we'll get into that, but ultimately that's what they're after.
It does seem like
bring it down and then we can build something new.
Tearing down the current system. Where was I going with this? Ultimately, I think that there's a group of people in society today that essentially deny sin, and any wrongs in the past were because since they deny sin, then they can't attribute it to sin, right? They attribute it to malice or to some sort of evil intent on people's part.
Okay.
And trying to get rid of that is going to be, because sin is real, it's going to doom us to the same thing.
Yeah, right.
So let's no, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say like I haven't conceptualized it like that before. Like the way I see it is we keep saying these people. I mean, they're not really like a monolith per se, but they're everywhere.
Yeah,
and people who are just looking to find wrongs, I guess, in society, and to dig up wrongs of the past, I guess. But don't they see everything as sin in the past? Like it's like all evil because they see society as kind of this oppressive structure.
Well, not really, because they see certain factions of society as evil, and in particular, it's the white male, right? Because for so long they say that the white male dominated and essentially had some sort of evil intent, and then they suppressed women and suppressed any sort of minority. But it was the women in the minority who they were the good guys, right?
Right. So to create perfect people.
Well, I'd say
I'm just poking at you. I'm just poking at your sin theory here. I don't know. You might be right.
I think an end goal of all of this is to attempt to create a utopia on Earth.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
I don't agree with that, but I agree that's a correct assessment.
Let's do that.
All right. Burn this place down. We're starting over, people. Yeah. No more Real Talk Studio.
So we made a giant list of topics that we could probably honestly take one of these and talk for 8 hours on it. What do you think out of this list that we read is the most fundamental bottom line problem with society, with Western society? Maybe one word.
Maybe read the list.
Oh,
yeah. Go through that list. I'm going through my notes here.
I mean, the list that I put together here wasn't even comprehensive, but at least scroll through mine. Cultural Marxism, totalitarianism, a culture of acceptance. This is just things I wanted to talk about. Fragility,
critical race theory,
white fragility, freedom of speech, expression, postmodernism, expressive individualism.
Yeah, the old 5-second word there. Nice.
Gotcha. Critical theory, critical race theory, racism, which ties into Black Lives Matter, social justice, white fragility. Man, like there's just so many buzzwords here.
Yeah. So I could divide your list into two kind of categories.
Let's start there.
Now, you seem to have a different list than I do, but
sorry. This is the list that I made up. But did I still have the list that I put in here? I could rattle that one off too, but
no, we can go with your list. I like your list.
There's gonna be a lot of overlap.
Oh, you like it?
Yeah.
I do like your list.
Identity politics. Maybe that's what I missed. Identity politics.
So a lot of that list falls under. So you mentioned freedom of speech. I'm gonna just contrast sort of the freedom side versus, I guess, the Marxist side. And I think if you kind of have those headings at the top of your list, then you can kind of put whatever topic underneath those headings.
Yeah, I would agree.
And those two, now there's going to be plenty of disagreement with this among certain audiences, but
that's what we're here for. Spark some disagreement, which sparks conversation, or vice versa. I'm not sure. So you say freedom and Marxism as the two categories?
Well, just based off of the topics that Tyler gave.
Okay. Yeah.
I would just pull out those two words.
Yeah. I too would blame Tyler. So good job.
So I'm taking as little responsibility for this as possible.
Yeah. Don't own this thing, because once we get in the weeds, it's going to become a disaster. But I think you're right. Like, so Marxism, I always seem to be coming back to this, and maybe people don't understand Marxism, so maybe we should just explain the core tenets of that to start. But I see that contrasted with what you said, freedom, which is like, freedom is, to me, Western society in as best we could manage it. Like, I think there's something to that Western society is, well, because it's based on the Bible and the core tenets of the Bible.
Yeah.
I think it's the best culture that, people have come up with. Maybe that's a terrible thing to say.
Sounds like a racist thing.
No, but I think it brings the real freedom. I mean, obviously capitalism's not perfect, but they always say, that's the best system until you try every other system.
No, it's the worst system.
It's the worst system until you try every other system,
ones.
right? Yeah. So it's like, and I think that's true. It's like, so, and I think Marxism is like the opposite of that. And, the 19th, 20th century, the 1900s kind of demonstrated that real clearly.
Yeah, right. We have to be a little bit careful with that because there are people who would try to put Marxism and freedom together, right? Because
Marxism and utopia,
freedom for the oppressed.
Freeing the oppressed, and the idea of Marxism is equality or equity for everyone, and the idea is then
that's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing at all. I totally agree. Equity, the end goal of Marxism is equity for everyone, and people say that will end up with the most freedom. I absolutely disagree. That's kind of where I'm going with my podcast series, and we can head in that direction because I've got
Well, let's give her. Like, okay, so just explain for the folks at home. So why isn't equality of outcome freedom for people? Or maybe define freedom to start.
Right.
Perhaps.
So I'm going to take a step back.
Freedom from, freedom to, that sort of thing.
Right. So Marxism aims for, like you said, equality of outcome.
Yep.
Rather, and the other system that we're talking about, the system we've labeled freedom, aims for equality of opportunity. Right. Yep. Those are phrases that we're pretty familiar with. Equality of opportunity says we all kind of get the same starting point. We get the same things to work with, and then what we do with those things can either be a good or a bad thing, and it can either put us in a good place or a bad place.
This is an ideal. This isn't to say that Western society has that, because we definitely don't.
Sure. Yeah,
or
absolutely.
Historically haven't.
Yeah.
I mean, we're maybe moving that way, but yeah.
Right. That was kind of the goal of Western society. Mm-hmm. What Marxism aims for, rather than equality of opportunity, is equality of outcome. So regardless of where you start, you all end up at the same place, right? Yep. So we understand that. And that looks like everyone has the same income level, same education, same everything. Everything is controlled by the government, essentially.
Yeah.
It doesn't give you room for preference and for
not at all.
Yeah.
It actually, so then you can see right there, like, it actually removes all freedom. Mm-hmm. It removes freedom to make your own choices, to have personal responsibility. Even. Because the actions you take don't determine your end goal.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, let's quickly take a step back to Marxism. Like, so I had to do a bunch of research on this, because I'm like, I know in essence where it goes. Like, you say Marxism, I always thought communism. Right.
Sure.
That's where it kind of leads, right?
Yeah.
And it is, I would say it's still in my head, it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
I would just say communism is like the politicalization of Marxism, Marxist thought. So I don't know, you want to run through Karl Marx? Like, he basically said there's two groups. You have oppressed group, which is like the working class, people who are employed. And then you have the governing group. This is the bourgeoisie, and then the proletariat, or the working class.
Yep.
The governing group, or the haves, are reigning over the have-nots, and it's up to the have-nots, up to a system like Marxism, to turn that over and to have everybody equal. So,
well, in the baseline assumption in Marxism is that everything is economic.
Yeah, and so that everything that the haves have
is taken from the poor.
So it's like, if you're an employer, your employee puts hours in for you, and that's you stealing off of them. And so in order to bring things back to where they should be, or where they would be if you left everything to be equal, you would have to give back to them, or they're allowed to steal off of you, basically, which is where it all went wrong, right? You gave people a license to go out and pillage, because it was like, well,
or
they stole it off you.
Or it all went right.
Well, I mean,
if you fall to, according to theory.
In his view, this was like going to bring about the utopia where everyone would work, and everyone would just have the same amount of stuff. And then obviously this became political, it became everything. But he like Karl Marx actually thought of it only in economic terms.
Well, I want to just rephrase that a little bit. I would say that every relationship in Marxism was seen as political. Perhaps not necessarily economic. So a husband and wife relationship would be political, because in Marx's view, the husband had power over the wife in traditional systems, right?
Because of his earning capacity, though.
Because of earning capacity.
So that's why I think it's...
And because traditional systems put the husband as the head of the household.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? And then Marx said every relationship in society was political, was basically a power struggle. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to pull that apart and take away that power struggle. And his idea was then everyone would be able to thrive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Which is, it sounds good. And there are things that Marx said that I do agree with.
Such as?
Yeah. So
let's put him down.
Put me in the hot seat. So he critiqued capitalism. Mm-hmm. And I think there are valid critiques of capitalism for sure, because you listen to a capitalist talk, like a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist will say that greed is good, right? Mm. Because greed brings profit, and with profit, you can help other people. But greed doesn't motivate you to help other people.
Mm-hmm.
Greed motivates you to take more for yourself, to find a way of getting more for yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So that is a very simple critique of capitalism.
Mm-hmm. But you see that, like, it's funny because you don't like to critique the things that you love. So it's like if you view yourself as a capitalist, you're like, yeah, but like there's no real problem with it. But like we're very easily like, we take Marxism, like, well, if you just extend that to where it would naturally go, that's a disaster. And then you're like, but no one ever did that for capitalism. Like that already, I was like, oh, really?
Right.
So yeah, you're like, no, but I like, being able to earn money and being allowed to do business and whatever, right?
Right. So like just to kind of solidify that, I don't know if any of you have watched The Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah,
back in the day,
right?
I don't know if I did.
Potentially.
So the movie that guy don't acknowledge it.
Well, it's on air now. Anyways,
the movie, the sort of the main character in that movie, he's a business magnate, right? And even now he's been to prison and out of prison and everything else. He's a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist. If you watch his lectures or seminars or whatever, he will say greed is good.
Movies based off a real guy.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Jordan Belfort, right?
Yes, that's right. I would not have come up with that name.
Okay, so there you go.
DiCaprio?
He plays him in the movie. Yeah.
Oh, so I haven't watched it, but I know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I've watched his seminars. So maybe that I'm taking some
I would not recommend the movie. It's
some of the heat off of
heavily
you.
profanity laced.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I got through some of it. But I've watched his seminars, so I've watched the real deal. So maybe that'll take some of the heat off of you.
Well, it's a real guy. Yeah. I was doing research for the podcast, like 7 years in advance.
That's where it goes, though, right? It's like if you extend capitalism out and you think greed is good, like what's stopping you from just being a complete crazy maniac in business, right?
Right. Absolutely. And he was a crazy maniac, and he got very rich very quick.
Yeah.
Right. He lived off the greed is good principle.
Mm-hmm.
But
so did a lot of people in Marxist, communism and stuff.
True. This is true. Turns out you can't fix human nature.
Well, that's just it, right?
What?
Yeah.
What have thoughts?
Podcast over.
Y'all need a savior. All right. Wrap.
Right. Y'all need a savior. Yeah. But so like what I'm trying to show by that is Marx did have valid critiques of capitalism.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. I have not read all his stuff, of course. There's a library there, but what he took from his critiques of capitalism is he went away from biblical principles of, for example, private property ownership.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a big one.
So rather than taking the bad aspects of capitalism and turning towards the Bible and using the Bible and biblical principles to right the wrongs of capitalism, he went the direct opposite direction.
Well, he dismissed religion.
He dismissed religion.
The opium of the masses.
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Religion was designed by the bourgeoisie to hold the proletariat down.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right? Yeah.
Which, to be fair to Marx, in like historical like Catholic Europe, was certainly true in some instances.
Yeah. We're talking like mid 1800s, like 1850 was probably, I think he was like
60s, something like that.
Yeah, somewhere
east to mid. Yeah.
So mid 1800s. So just to frame that for people.
Yeah. Right.
This is after like the Industrial Revolution, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Which is like, now you see all these like,
all these kids working at factories and all these people living in
but you
cities.
See like this rise of capitalism because of this industrial boom, right?
It worked, but at the cost of a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Marx is looking at that and saying, okay, this system obviously is not optimal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The start of the Industrial Revolution was like, there was a lot of good that came out of it, but it was pretty dirty and not that great in the beginning either, right?
Not great to be a 6-year-old in
a factory,
yeah.
and cities just full of smog and whatever else, right? So, Marx. The problem with Marx is that he took the wrongs of capitalism and went the opposite way of biblical principles.
Yeah. So basically, he said fundamentally, the world is class warfare. So everything that happens is like you're either oppressed or you're the oppressor, and I guess what happened is that you would need a government to step in or some ruling body to step in and right that wrong.
Right. Well, his idea was that the proletariat, the people who were being oppressed, would rise up. Yeah. And then they would form their government, sort of the people's government.
I read that somewhere. Or I heard that somewhere they asked a Marxist why It's like, well, why haven't the proletariat risen up then? Because it's not really what happened, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, in communist Russia, I guess, or in Ukraine, they did, right? But that was more like a, there was just sweeps of like pillaging and whatever else, and it just went terribly, right?
I'm not entirely familiar what happened there, but
yeah, but in general, I don't think there was like a rising up of that class, right?
No, there never
Which is what
really
they
was.
said. Well, this is what will inevitably happen.
Yeah.
And they said, well, it's because the proletariat have imbibed this, like, if I work hard enough, I can make it attitude, where then I could be part of the bourgeoisie class. So the bourgeoisie did such a good job saying, hey, we have so much, but you could also have a lot if you would work really hard for us.
Right.
And so it's like, and then there's examples they give, like, well, this guy looks like he changed classes. And it's like, well, okay, then everyone was just trying that. And they weren't really focused on the base level of, tearing the system down.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, it seems so warped, but yeah.
Yeah. I don't know where we're going with that. We talked about Marxism as a precursor.
Well, I was just thinking that's like the bottom line. Cause you get into like, you start talking about white fragility, critical race theory. It all comes back to the core tenet of Marxism, which is like, you separate the world into, oppressed and oppressor. And if you view the whole world as groups, of course that's not biblical, and it just seems to sink your society. So that's where my first question was. So wherever you want to go with this,
Yeah, no, that's interesting. We can go into cultural Marxism if you want.
Yeah. Well, what's the difference?
That's a big factor. Well, okay, so you have Marxism, and then you get a bit of a history lesson here. But I got this from a number of different sources, but a really good talk from Fody Bauckham on YouTube. It's entitled Cultural Marxism, and he kind of works through the history of how this idea came about. And so basically, I'll just kind of summarize it semi quickly here. But you got this fellow by the name of Antonio Gramsci. He's an Italian philosopher. And he takes what Marxism talked about in Marxism and says, all right, like this is in like the early 1900s.
Yeah.
And he looks at it and says, all right, like here's what's going on. But we're not seeing this rising up of the proletariat like Marx predicted. Like what's up? What's happening? Why isn't this theory manifesting itself? And then he thought, okay, well, there's still this powerful factor of culture. And he came to define the term cultural hegemony, which is like the kind of embodiment of like the peak symbol of power in the society. So for us today in the West, our cultural hegemony would be someone who is white, male, heterosexual, cis, which just means like you're not an abnormal sexual manifestation or whatever. Able-bodied, native-born, usually Christian. Christian is usually tagged onto that as well. So that's kind of like the peak.
So when people say
thing of power,
systemic racism, systemic whatever, that's what you're describing. Which
well,
is cultural hegemony, because it's like built right into the system that was built in order to.
Well, because the system was built by the people of power. The people of power are white, male, heterosexual, cis, able-bodied, native.
So it's kind of synonymous terms, actually. Cultural hegemony and like systemic.
Well, they tie into each other. They tie into each other because of those types of men. I
couldn't have defined that, so that's good.
Those types of people make the system according to the theory, right? So you got Gramsci. He kind of comes up with this idea, right? And then you get, basically, like, if you're not part of that cultural hegemony, you're oppressed.
Yeah. And
so it turns Marxism from an economic sphere into a cultural sphere.
Right.
So you have like the oppressor, white male class. Yeah. That's where like the roots of what we see playing out today. Especially Mike's talked about this a lot with Black Lives Matter. That's where you get a lot of that stuff. And then
this is before the Frankfurt School.
No, then you hit the Frankfurt School in like the 30s. And these people are in Germany. They come up with, at least to the best of my understanding, critical theory, not critical race theory, but critical theory, which is just like excessive critical thought about any sort of philosophy.
Right. It criticizes anything, but doesn't provide any answer.
Yeah. There's no answers.
I'm good at
that. You can't criticize critical theory. And basically they go after everything.
Yeah.
So like it's
Well, we can get into defining that later because that's going to be just an absolute nightmare.
Well, that's like so broad. Like we might get into critical race theory, which is more.
Yeah, but it ties it all together, right?
But you can see critical theory in other disciplines too.
Yeah,
it's just 100%. Like it's just any sort of.
Well, so like the whole LGBTQ discussion is critical theory.
Yes.
Right. So that's kind of the sort of realm philosophical realm that we're working in.
Yeah, exactly. And so you get a lot of these critical theorists, right? They come out of the universities. So you have the Frankfurt School, which is basically just a group of these professors in Germany.
Mhm.
But then the wars, after the war, I believe, they go to America. They go to Columbia in New York there, and they start to spread this idea of critical theory, and it just manifests itself throughout the university system in the States. And the thing about critical theory is, and also what Gramsci was talking about too, is that the best way to change the power of the culture and to overturn the cultural hegemony is to go after the people of influence. So the people of the robes he talked about. So judges, professors, pastors, politicians, those types of people.
And that's exactly what's happening.
And that's what happened because it came out of the university system.
Yeah. A lot of good things come out of Germany, eh?
Yeah, way to go, Germany.
Volkswagen.
Doing it right. Yeah, so that's kind of where that whole idea came from. And that's
right.
That's a real quick history. In that.
I guess that explains why it's so prevalent. Like we'll probably mention a bunch tonight that a lot of this is prevalent in the universities, in the academia.
Yeah,
it's prevalent in our politics. It's prevalent with those people who would have had power in those days. Like, right? It's like,
yeah,
and that's why I guess it just came and they infiltrated those things instead of just our normal everyday life.
So with your brief history there, I kind of, in one of my Black Lives Matter episodes, I kind of pick up where you left off that history that you just laid out.
Okay.
Because critical theory also influenced the civil rights movement.
Yes.
So within the civil rights movement, you had actors like Martin Luther King Jr., who was basically trying to hold America to its founding ideals. But then you also had guys like Malcolm X and the Black Panthers.
Yep.
And they subscribed to critical theory, and they were much more militant. And they very much supported the idea of tearing the existing structure down.
Oh, yeah.
So that idea was present throughout the whole civil rights movement and is seeming to gain influence now. There's a lot of people who are picking up on that and building it for sure.
Yeah. And it kind of because the civil rights, obviously achieved success in the 60s there.
Yeah.
With the passage of, I actually don't know the name of the act off the top of my head, but it was basically, granting equality for Black Americans. So you don't have to. Yeah, that's fair. It's Civil Rights Act, I believe it's just called. LBJ.
Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Oh.
Yeah, that came a little later for us, but.
So, but
why is it picking up steam now? Maybe, and has been has been coming out for a while.
The interesting thing you said was they were more militant, which is what you see now is everything's just being burnt down.
Yeah.
Which is how do you live in America, live in Western society, and believe within you that lighting something on fire is helping? Well, the way you get there is exactly what we're describing is if you frame, two groups against each other and say, well, they only have what they have because they've took it from you. Then it's pretty easy to say, well, okay, well, let's go get it back. Whatever it takes. Yeah. It doesn't matter if that individual is oppressed. If they're part of that group, you can go back and take it back. And so you're seeing all these things being burned down, all these protests, and they're not mostly peaceful. So, which is what you hear on CNN. So
yeah. I had a thought.
I'll jump in for a second. I don't think these people are they don't see it as helpful. They see it as tearing down the society.
Right.
To an earlier point.
But it's but it's their right. And that's
no,
it's justified. It's justified in their mind. And then it's not that they want to be on top in the society. They want to tear this whole thing down.
Oh yeah.
But the way, if you frame it in a Marxist, again, we're going back to Marx. If you frame it in a Marxist way that, you're up against him, then it's well, why does he get to, I was oppressed. Why does he get to have everything? Right. So it's let's go take it back.
Yeah. So if the whole structure is built to hold you down, right, then there is perhaps a certain amount of justification to tearing down that structure to kind of level the playing field.
Yeah, you can view it as a war, right? It's the Civil War was fought for a reason. Every war is fought for a reason.
Yeah.
But if you view it like a war, it's even Christians would believe, we can go to war. Right.
Yeah. Right.
And you go to war against other countries or other ideologies, basically. Right. And so they're just saying, well, let's go to war. but they're not going to just declare it. And it's not that it's like one army here, one army here. It's just like we're together. It's just this like ideological war, but now it's coming out in the way it's going to come out, right?
Right.
Yeah, we're all I'll lose my voice here already. Good grief. Anyways,
it's your first hour here.
Yeah, I know. We're like 45 minutes in. I was going to make a point here, and I was going to say, have you come across intersectionality in kind of your research you've done?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think you could explain that for the folks at home, or what?
So intersectionality, it is basically we've been talking a lot about kind of generally identity politics where,
right, these all tie together, man.
Yeah, they do all tie together for sure. Where kind of identity politics is where policy is established based on someone's identity. Mm-hmm. Right. So we've been talking a little bit about Black Lives Matter, and you see policy being developed to support Black people. That's identity politics. Now, intersectionality is where two identities come together at an intersection. Right. So you have, for example, the identity of race and the identity of gender or sex. So you have Black and white, and you have male and female. So then there, all of a sudden at that one intersection, you've got four groups of people. Yep. Right. So what intersectionality attempts to do is kind of almost classify your level of oppression, so to speak. So whereas a white heterosexual Christian male sits on top of the power structure, perhaps a Black trans female sits at the bottom, because Black and transgender and female are three oppressed identities, right? And she lives at the intersection of those identities. Mm-hmm. And because of where she is situated on that sort of identity politics hierarchy, she is the most oppressed. Yeah. And therefore she also deserves the most help.
So maybe to frame this so that we can grasp why this is really important. So I would say the funny thing about intersectionality right off the top is that it's not all, the way they phrase it isn't all wrong, because this is true for a lot of the things we're going to talk about, because the way they phrase it is that you can't, like what Marx would say, you could put everyone in a group. It's like this group or this group. And that was economic or, political or whatever. But they would say, well, you're not just, poor. You're also, you're white or you're Black. You're also male or you're female. And so you can't be really identified by one characteristic of yourself, which as a Christian, you'd be like, yeah, no, like I'm an individual. God made me in his image. I should be defined by every characteristic that makes me up. And then they say, okay, well, we can't be characterized by one characteristic of ourselves. And then their solution is like, well, let's just take a bunch of them, and then, where they meet, that's how you identify. So it's like, we would say, well, no, like you have to see the whole person. You have to see their whole situation. Right. But so it's very easy to like get on board with some of these ideas right away. And then like they start leading you somewhere where it's like, that's totally not Christian.
Right. So where does intersectionality lead? Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, you can't treat people as individuals, or
you can't.
Equals.
That's
right.
You're no longer equal.
It is still a identity politics Marxist kind of idea.
It is.
Right. Yeah. It's like, we still want to be able to label you. And most of those labels are, visible.
Well, we went from bourgeoisie, proletariat, rich, poor. Then we got into the cultural Marxism. Mm-hmm. Then we got to the people, like the cultural hegemony, the white straight male at the top, and everybody else below them. And now the intersectionality is like Kimberly Crenshaw's theory. It extends it further, and basically now we're all these smaller subgroups, right? So then we're all like, there's different layers of oppression. There's no actual real scale to it for sure. Like you won't find that anywhere.
No,
like
you won't.
No, but that's what
I feel I could make one.
Yeah,
if probably.
I saw Neil Shenvi had a whole
I don't think it exists.
Table of like, but they had labeled out like these are the possible oppressions. So it was almost like, there's try to see how many places you slot in, because then they'll like, right.
Yeah,
so
that exists.
There was a list of like, okay, here are all your oppressions. This is how they might manifest. Yeah. And it was like, oh, okay, well, why don't you just tell people how terrible it would be to be them?
I love talking about this as white Christian males.
Yeah, I know.
White straight Christians. but the whole thing is that we're not allowed to talk about this.
Right.
So anyone who's listening, who's black, female, doesn't matter. Anybody who has like not every single, dominant trait
could cancel us.
Could cancel us. If you're anything other than a white, straight male, Christian straight male, you should just turn it off because we're irrelevant.
Well, and part of the critical race theory is that lived experience is how truth is found.
Mm-hmm.
And so, right, we have no good experience on this table.
I think that's critical theory in general, right? Like
critical race theory in particular.
But that's just race defined. But you could define that by like gender, anything. Like critical theory would say everything would, you have to have oppression in order, or that lived experience through that oppression in order to be able to speak or be credible on an issue of anything. So you have to be trans in order to speak about trans issues. You have to be, whatever.
You got to be trans to play trans.
I can't even think of it.
To play a trans person in a movie, you have to be a trans person.
But think about how wrong that is, because part of what makes us human is empathy. So if people are willing to like pause in their own life and listen to someone else's story, we fall into that trap too so often, right?
Oh, totally.
As Christians, it's so easy to put a label on people outside the church, right? Yeah. And it's so easy to consider them as something else, but we've got to distill things down to the most basic identity, and that's being made in the image of God, right? I can't exactly remember where I was going with, but yeah, we fall into that trap of dividing ourselves into little groups so often. It's so easy.
But it is helpful in many ways, and that's why
in some ways
I think it's so tempting. Because it is, it's very dangerous.
To like define some sort of hierarchy based off of your innate characteristics that you can't change is so dangerous.
Yeah, the thing
totally.
Is, so the problem, I always see if I can phrase this without being like just super blatantly racist or something.
Well, don't be racist at all, not just blatantly racist.
Oh, no.
Blatant racism, problem.
Casual
racism, maybe.
Systemic racism. Yeah. So I think this came from Neil Shenby too.
Is he a racist?
No.
He's half Indian, half white. So
he can't be racist. He's got
Indian. A bit of a card up his sleeve there.
I've heard
I'm 1,024th Indian or something.
Yeah.
I've heard your ideas make you racist, not your skin color.
Okay, well, actually, I was going to get to that, but if you want to jump into
Hold that for 1 second. So I was just thinking this because he said he basically laid out an example of like a job interview. And they did a study, and he lays it out a lot better, but they basically tried to figure out if a white applicant and a black applicant who had very, very, very similar skill sets, resumes, and everything, they controlled for a lot of things, went to a job interview, who was getting the call back? And I think it was 60-40 or 70-30 or something. The white person would get a call back. So you'd be like, okay, that's racism. So his point was like, in people's minds, and the fact is that there are more black people incarcerated than there are white people. There's more black people with criminal record. We can debate why that is. But that's just a fact, right? And I think people know that, and whether or not they view that as one way or the other is, irrelevant. What they're trying to control by not calling the black person back is for criminality, not for race. So you're not allowed to ask if somebody has a criminal record, but if you were, then maybe that disparity would be gone. Right. So his point like that was like, there was just one example. Like, so how do you balance these things? Like, how do you say, well, that really could have been racism, or it could have been like, I'm sure there are people who would say, well, I don't want a black person working for me. And then they would like, that's just obviously sinful. Yeah. It's wrong. And the majority of people.
That's pretty simple.
It's just that's the blatant racism.
So Thomas, just to further your point, Thomas Sowell talked about it too. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Thomas Sowell.
1A and 1B. So that's where you're going with this?
Well,
discrimination.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So not getting into that specific theory, but he talks about prior to the time that they made getting criminal records on employee applicants prior to the time that they made that illegal, then people could do a criminal background check on their applicants, and Black people were more likely to get hired. But then once they made that illegal, and they made it illegal because more Black people had criminal records. Right. Once they made it illegal,
is that really the reason?
Yeah.
Oh wow!
So they thought the criminal background checks.
So it's meaning well policies.
Well, that went the other way. I mean, we can talk about that too. It's just like politics is never, very rarely the answer,
right?
So can adequately address these issues.
They made it illegal to have these criminal background checks, and all of a sudden, people knew that Black people were more likely to have criminal records. So then less Black people were hired. So like you said, it's a policy that meant well, but the actual effects of it were the opposite.
There's a lot of policies like that.
He makes a distinction between two types of discrimination.
Yeah.
The first one is the obvious racist one that we mentioned. Just like, I'm not going to hire this person because they're Black or because they're whatever, because they're a woman or something.
Right. Yeah.
It's like just very obvious. And then the second one, B, is the type of discrimination where you don't have the information at hand and you're making a generalization based on typical, broad stats based on, or broad ideas.
Well, that's also what keeps you safe in the world, which is interesting. Generalizing about situations is like part of what we use in order to stay alive.
Here's a safe example. It's
just racist. Doing it on racist grounds is like race grounds is just terrible idea.
Well, yeah, but it's really tricky because say you're driving through Hamilton or whatever, and you're like, that's a poor part of town. I might want to avoid that. And you don't mean it like poor white or poor Black. It doesn't matter. It's just like poor, which equals more crime, more danger. I'll probably take a different route around or whatever, right? Like that's one of those examples.
You're not going to stop in the variety store in that part of town at midnight, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna wait till you get into like a wealthy area, Stony Creek,
whatever.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly.
You're talking about this like nice like Robin DiAngelo white fragility style. So
what do you mean?
Oh, she lays this out in her book that they were talking about we can get into white fragility, man, it's a disaster. She lays it out an example almost similar to that. It was like you're talking about a neighborhood that's a bad neighborhood, and she was saying, well, sometimes white people say that and they mean Black neighborhood. I don't know that I've ever done that, but it's more like you imply it by not saying it. And then that was like one of the enabling factors of white fragility. So,
well, there's nothing wrong with that. I was using as a race neutral.
I wasn't saying you're just not labeling or anything.
No. I know. I'm just trying to dissect her idea, which you just espoused.
I get what you mean, and it's exactly right. It's like it's the safety thing, right? It's like I'm not going to just go out and into a variety store in this part of town because it's densely populated, which causes more crime, and it seems you label it right away when you see it as like, okay, this is something dangerous to me. You don't have, like, the point you're trying to make is you don't have all the information at hand.
Exactly.
Right? You don't have all the information about all those people in the variety store and around the variety store. Yeah. So you make a decision for your own safety based on assumptions.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say those assumptions are racist or they're sexist, depending on the situation, or they're homophobic or whatever.
Classist,
perhaps.
Whatever.
Yeah, but it's hard to reconcile that in my mind. But I guess I see how people get there. But Robin DiAngelo in her book too said something like she stepped over a homeless Black person and then had to repent from the racism later. It's like, yeah, but you would step over a homeless white person. It's not the fact that their color, like it's not their race, it's the homelessness. That to me would be more.
And
right. So you're making a judgment based on that they're homeless, not based on their race. Maybe your judgment based on their homelessness is wrong too. Like more than likely you should have compassion, or like, there may be another way to go about that interaction.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily like, he was Black, so now you're racist too. It's like, yeah. So anyways, we're probably down the track.
We're a little down the road there, but I was going to get it back to, like, we were talking about intersectionality before and racism. And racism is no longer just an individual sin.
Yeah.
Like, we spent all this time trying to figure out, what is racist, what is not.
Right.
It's because of this idea of the cultural hegemony and these systems made by white straight males, as the logic goes. Therefore, if you are a white straight male in today's society, you unknowingly or knowingly benefit from the systems set up by people like you in past history. And these systems are oppressive. This is the theory. These systems are oppressive to people of color, people of different disabilities or genders even and whatnot. And therefore, just by virtue of your skin color, of your sex or whatever, you are participating in an oppressive society,
right?
And therefore, our oppressive system is racist, which makes all white people racist, which gets into D'Angelo.
And then that is the theory. It is that all white people are racist. That is explicitly said.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But could you combat the first part of that? Is that it is intentional or unintentional, which I think is terribly problematic. But the second part of that is, what's the second part of that? What were you just saying?
Institutional racism.
Yeah. So can you really say that it's not, right? Like, I think there's well-meaning Christians who would say there's a good argument to be made, I think, for systemic racism. Like, there's a system that's been made by a certain group, and whether or not that, like, I think that's still a debate, especially in certain situations or certain aspects of life.
You'd have to get specific, but this theory is not specific.
Right.
It's the entire system.
Well, the theory.
But the thing is, how do you shut it down when there's still this open discussion that could be had on whether or not there is systemic racism?
So
right, you can't just be there's no systemic racism, so this is obviously wrong. Shut it down. Don't talk about it.
The theory deliberately avoids specifics because if you get into specifics, then you have to have evidence for it.
Well, there's actually a really good quote from Allie Beth Stuckey. Her podcast is relatable. She says the antidote to critical theory is critical thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's classic.
That's a good one.
So that's a great idea, and it's totally true. You can look at the institutions that are set up now, and it's really easy to claim, because in general, Black people are incarcerated at higher rates, and they have a lower income level, then all institutions must be racist. Right. But it's an entirely different thing to go out to an institution and actually see racist behavior. It's very, very difficult, and it's illegal for institutions to have racist behavior. Right. It's already illegal. The whole premise of the discussion is that every institution is built on racism. So then they must be torn down. But it's a theory that can't be proven, and deliberately so.
Yep. It survives off of that.
Yeah, that's right.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe let's dive into the first part of that, because I think that is what frames most of it. Like, critical theory basically says you can be racist, you can be sexist, you can be homophobic, intentionally or unintentionally. You could, which is, I think traditionally we think if you're racist, it's almost an act, right? It's like, you clearly did something or thought something or said something that was racist. But now, by just living as a white person, you're complicit in this racism, which to me is like, I mean, I can't even get past the point that, like, Robin DiAngelo writes an entire book on white fragility, which is essentially this. It's like, you are complicit in this system. We got to figure out how to deal with it.
If you deny it.
She's white. So it's like, who are you to even talk about it? You're like, your whole thing, like, it's like framed around, I shouldn't have the ability to talk about this. And then you're like, but listen, I have things to say.
And she's also making a lot of money.
Off
of what she's doing.
Millions.
She is
New York Times bestseller for months.
That's she's got these Black people at her feet almost. It's like, I mean,
so it's
racism.
It's a white person stooping down to help the Black person, right? What kind of image, like, is she unwittingly giving?
Yeah.
Black people need white people's help.
It's a bit offensive, I would think.
Well, I would say it's absolutely offensive.
I think she goes on stage and apologizes every night for it. She's probably like, I'm very sorry, I'm white.
Well, does she give over does she give over the money she made?
Well, no, but
that should be reparations.
That goes back to Marx. It's like, you can't do that, man.
Like, I think if she wants to put her money where her mouth is, she'll give over the money that she makes from her book.
Yeah, well, I know. Does she have a chapter on that?
That'd be good, yeah.
Yeah, it's a problem, right? Like, And people view her as like the champion for a changing view on this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just,
But it's one of the problems with this theory is that it's actually holding the so-called oppressed people down. It's making them dependent on other people.
Yeah.
And when you're dependent, then you can't do anything for yourself. Right. You can't, there's no sense of personal responsibility because you have nothing you're responsible for. It's other people holding you down. They're the ones that are responsible. Yeah. So someone else has to come through, some sort of savior figure has to come through and remove that oppression, and then you'll be free.
Well, yeah. And
it almost sounds religious.
Yeah. Ooh, who would have thought?
Exactly, right?
Oh. Yeah. No, it's interesting because, yeah, like you said, there's no way if you see yourself as part of one of these oppressed groups and you live in a fundamentally racist society with all these structures set up to keep you down, you have zero incentive to continue with this society.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why not riot and burn it down?
Yeah, and get what you can from it. Go loot that store.
Go loot a Target, bro. That's right. Whatever you want.
Yeah.
Hit up a Zellers. I don't even know those exist anymore.
Does this make sense? We're just gonna throw over to producer Tim because he's
we got a fourth mic now.
We got a fourth mic, so he can chime in. So are you lost? Are your eyes glazed over from us?
I am a little lost. I'm not gonna lie.
I had a feeling like we're really in the weeds already because it's so hard not to when you.
I wonder, like, you talk about like Marxism, right? And you talk about all these ideas or ideals that everyone has. Like, how do I phrase this? Marxism, like, you're saying that everyone wants the same thing, right? You would be all under the same laws. You're working early as a kid, so everyone can make the same money, all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, when you're talking about this racism thing, everyone's holding on to their differences is the problem, right? So in order to be racist, is someone's calling you out on your difference and saying that they're better than your difference. Does that make sense?
Somewhat. Yeah. Like, are we reaching the same conclusion that because the theory, critical race theory, is that every disparity between races is a result of discrimination.
See,
I think that's everything.
Yeah, that's difficult because in my mind...
It's not true, but that's the theory.
It's because, and I'm pretty sure you said it too, is that everyone is different as is, right? Like, we got different skin color, we got different thoughts, different cultures, all that kind of stuff from the very beginning. So then how do you make a Marxist society, if that's their end goal, out of something that is already different from the beginning?
So you make a very good point, because the logical conclusion of identity politics and intersectionality is absolute division. So everyone lives at a slightly different intersection. Like, we're all Christian white males here, but we all have our own life experiences that have helped to define us, have helped to, in a way, create an identity for us. So we all live at a different intersection. So if you live and breathe identity politics and intersectionality, then the end result, the logical end result, is a society that is completely divided. And you're trying to create policy at a government level for a society that is completely divided, and everyone is competing for the same thing. So what Marx does is Marx essentially says, well, the government's going to take control of everything and give everyone the same thing. The government is going to make sure that everyone gets the same thing regardless of who they are. And that's sort of the kind of like the saving idea and the idea that will usher in a utopia. It's going to equalize everyone regardless of who they are.
Yeah. Which is interesting, because I believe it's India who has this democracy of, like, you have two different levels. You got your poor democracy and your rich democracy, right? Pretty much when, like, this poor level, you've got all your decisions are made for you. You have no choice at all. You, like, from who you marry to what your job is to, like, everything, right? And you think that's a utopia? Because wouldn't that fall under the same thing?
Well, that's just it. You don't get to be different. You have to be the same.
Okay, but in the Indian example, you got a history of, like, the caste system and all that kind of stuff. So that is a bit different, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, you're coming from
Indian
the
listeners.
Although
all zero of them.
This all landed, like, in communist Russia and communist, like, in the Soviet Union, I guess.
Cuba,
yeah. I mean, they all come from different places, but when you adopt this ideology, like, everyone's so different, but you have to be treated all the same, economically.
Well, it's funny because there's so much celebration of diversity of all types. Diversity is king. That's one of the amazing buzzwords of the 21st century.
Diversity is our strength.
Diversity is our strength. Our prime minister is fond of saying.
Oh man,
yeah. But but diversity is our strength, but also we should all have equal outcomes and all be the same.
Right. But you don't get an equal say, which is, so it's like democracy without democracy.
It's because the oppressed people need the most, so they have the loudest voice.
Right, but we haven't even said freedom of speech yet.
Freedom of speech.
Ooh. Well,
Mike's buzzing.
Right, but you're talking about democracy is like everyone gets a vote, right? It's like ideally, I think like if you take democracy to the furthest thing, everything is a referendum. It's like, do you think that we should do this?
Yeah, we don't live in a direct democracy for that reason.
Right. I mean, it's not practical.
But the fundamental idea behind democracy is that every individual in the society is equal. Yeah. But, it's at a certain point of age.
But if you adopt this mentality, even though we are trying to adopt it into a democracy, which is obviously, got its pitfalls and peril.
Right.
But if you try to do that, which is what we're trying to do, is you don't get an equal say. So you lose your freedom of speech as a white person because you were a part of this oppressor class, and now your voice isn't worthy of as much attention as everyone else's.
Right. Yeah. Because it starts, democracy comes around because we're all equals, and it starts, let's just be honest about history. It starts with the white males in the U.S. and usually landowning, which this goes back to Britain probably, but. Eventually the whole story is, the different groups that were historically disenfranchised gain the rights. And especially this is true in America, the whole promise of the Constitution and what is laid out there.
There's an argument to be made that
just let me finish this thought. So you only get that because of the Judeo-Christian underpinnings.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Because why is everyone equal? Because we're all created by God, in the image of God.
Yeah.
You don't get that from
the image of God. That's a very key.
Yeah, that's like the most important verse in the whole book almost.
Yeah. So, but we're also seeing the downfall of democracy. We have this idea that democracy is the ideal. A lot of people in the West have that idea.
Yeah.
But what is democracy? One way of viewing it is, well, democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. Right? You have a system
that's great. I love that.
The majority can oppress the minority.
So it's rigged.
Right?
Yeah.
So a democracy guided by nothing or guided by humans has huge potential for wrong.
Oh, totally.
Right.
The funny thing is that neither us or the states are in any way a majority imposing their view, because like
the white Christian male.
Well, I mean, there's white Christian males on both sides of the state in the States, right?
Yeah,
they're split right down the middle.
So the States is split almost perfectly down the middle.
Yeah, not in this country though.
Maybe someone give me a history lesson at some point. But how did they get to a point where they only had two options? I just don't understand that.
So that has to do a lot with political systems, and I would suggest we don't get into that because we're going to seriously go into the weeds then.
It's not like good and bad, but it's like strange divide. So anyways, I wanted to read this because when you were saying that,
I'll just touch on that very briefly. Part of that is because a lot of people in the States, kind of the people who subscribe to the original founding ideals, don't view the States as a democracy.
It's a republic.
It's a republic. It's a constitutional republic.
Yep.
So that means, that term republic defines a lot of their political structure. I don't know enough about it to really get into it. But basically it's a group of people that are guided by certain principles, and those principles are set up in such a way, or they're supposed to be set up in such a way that prevents the wrongs of democracy. So these principles are set up in such a way so that the majority cannot oppress the minority. And
so that's just like amazingly providential.
The checks and balances.
That landed in with people that were Judeo-Christian, had Judeo-Christian values.
Right. Well, it only comes about because of Judeo-Christian.
Right.
Right. But you could easily have there are other republics, I'm guessing, right? I'm just like, there's obviously other republics in the world.
Not before that though. No. Maybe France tried it.
I don't know if they would have defined themselves as a republic. Don't know.
Yeah. Anyways, we don't go down that rabbit hole. Yeah. I'm going to attempt to read this because this was straight from Robin DiAngelo. she was doing a speech and she read her own book on stage, which I thought was like just great. She was getting like goosebumps reading her own book.
Big D'Angelo fan here. Yeah.
I wish I could impress myself that much.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Oh, you know what I think is relevant in the world? What I wrote. So I'm going to read what she wrote, which I think is deeply wrong. But this is like, she's writing about the relationship between people, right? And she said, in fact, if you are white and you've not devoted years of sustained study, struggle, and focus to this topic, being race relations, your opinions are necessarily very limited. So she basically says, like, unless you're me, because I've obviously done this and she needs an excuse why she's, able to do this. Unless you're white and you've spent your entire life thinking about black people, you're not allowed to talk. Which was like, okay, so now if you believe that this is how it should be, then you should also believe that that person just shouldn't be able to vote. So like, why would someone whose opinions are necessarily limited be able to vote? That's like, so you're like depersonalizing the people who have, So like historically it was like white males had the power. They allowed women to vote. They allowed whoever else to vote. And now it's like, well, they've had their time in the sun. Let's now take their vote away almost and say, okay, well now just the oppressed people get to vote.
Yep.
But you're taking away, well, like you said, you're depersonalizing or dehumanizing the people who disagree with you. Mm-hmm. And it'd be interesting. I wonder what she would say face to face with someone like Thomas Sowell. I have a feeling that interaction would never happen because
you don't know.
Does Thomas Sowell read his own books on stage?
I don't think so. I don't quote me on that, but I don't think so.
He just like publishes one and then he's like, right, to work on the next.
Yeah, that's right.
Just pumps them out. Yeah, man. Like how do you combat that? Because we do find ourselves talking, like if you see in the media, we live in a very divided time, and people seem to have their own sets of facts, and their own sets of truths. But part of that does come back down to the idea of critical theory and critical race theory, and
it's playing with the idea of postmodernism, that there is no absolute truth. Mm-hmm. Everyone has their own truth.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and also in critical race theory, if you think about these ideas that we've typically held in high esteem, I guess this comes back to the cultural hegemony again. Like, what are the ideals that the society, like the straight white male, holds very high? Mm-hmm. So stuff like scientific method, objectivity, reason, rationality, logic. The facts that result from these processes. Yeah. Those are all, this is how theory goes, these are all products of a white oppressive system.
Yeah, right. So
they have to be done away with.
There was a blow up on Twitter several months back. I'm not on Twitter myself, but I've heard about it. It was that big of a blow up. That 2 + 2 could equal 5.
Yes.
It could, if you are part of a different worldview that allows it to equal 5.
I didn't hear that it could equal 5. I just heard it couldn't equal 4.
Well, I don't know what the argument is there, but in our limited worldview, scientific, rational worldview, guided by white males as the majority of the scientists, we have determined that 2 + 2 = 4. Mm-hmm. But if you're not part of this worldview, it could equal anything for you.
Right. So this is the objectivity thing that they're after. Yeah. So I think that was a really good example, because I heard that it was like 2 + 2 = 4. So if you have 2 sheep and 2 cows, that doesn't equal 4 sheep. And you're like, okay, right. Well, that's not what you're trying to calculate animals. Like, and so like, that's your white male mind determining what you're trying to count. It's just like, well, okay, well, then math's not objective. Math's not objective. We might as well just dig a hole, because it's like,
we're not all equal. We don't have an objective standard.
And you said, like, what's the solution? Like, the solution is the Bible. Like, you got to go back to, like, what does the Bible say? The Bible says, we are all made in the image of God. So that means every single person. And the fact that you're born gives you your identity and gives you your,
absolutely,
your value, right? And so, like, if you're going to do away with that, well, then, everything's on the table, right?
Right.
Abortion, everything. Right.
Yeah.
So,
if you don't base your identity off of an absolute,
Mm-hmm.
And Christianity gives you that absolute. We're made in the image of God. But if you don't base your identity off an absolute, everyone's identity off an absolute, then like everything's up for grabs.
Oh yeah.
And so this is the danger of it in the church too. So if we let this seep into the church, this idea, and even well-meaningly, like, you know, you can be a very compassionate person and want to, you know, kind of adopt some of these views in order to better understand oppressed people. Something that a lot of people are doing. If you let it come into the church, now all of a sudden, you know, everything's up. The term, what was it? Decolonizing your theology. It was like, so basically it was like, well, you know, you're a white male. And so you view the Bible as, you know, this objective truth, which you call objective truth.
Yeah.
But if I'm of a different class, I could interpret the Bible, read the same words and come to a different conclusion, which is like, if you believe that, then you don't believe the Bible.
But I just want to reframe that a little bit, because I believe we all have a tendency to go down these paths of identifying something else, say whether like, well, we all identify by our jobs, for example, and it's very easy to classify people according to their jobs and kind of in a way forget that they're made in the image of God, because you kind of, you hold onto contacts because of how useful they might be for you. Right. So it is, I think we all actually do have that tendency a little bit. I think it's actually part of sinful nature. So one example of this, I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. He kind of asked the question, when is the most divided time in America? And it's Sunday morning when everyone's in church. Every church is a different group of people. You have very few mixed churches, right? Which is a very, very interesting thought, because we're saying that the Bible can bring us all back together, but it's when people are worshiping that they're most divided. So how do we reconcile that?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, without compromising.
Yeah,
I'm just going to throw it out there.
Every good working relationship's like, you know, you're married, and it's like, well, how do you stay married? It's like, well, everyone's like, you know, you're 95, you can be married 60 years. Like, oh, compromise, right? It's like, well, right. And there's a lot to that. It's like, you know, you have to agree to work at it together. Well, you don't agree to work at the Bible with the Bible, right?
Right.
You know, Christ doesn't say, well, you know, I'll give and take with you. It's like, no, like this is the truth. And now if we can't defend that, then, you know, what do we do?
So on your question there, Mike, it's a different question in the context of the States and here, I think.
Okay.
Just because we don't have the same history in terms of
sure. Yeah.
Like I'm not saying there isn't racism in Canada, but not to the same extent as there was, at least on a legal institutional level, that there was in the States.
Systemic level?
Well, I could argue against that.
I'm not saying there was none. The immigration policy was certainly.
So immigration policy, but also like the easy example is residential schools. But even stepping beyond that, like I forget who it was, but it was specifically referenced in Parliament that residential schools were to sort of teach the native out of the native.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
To completely destroy their culture.
Yes.
Right. So that's that
cultural genocide.
Yeah. That is institutional racism at essentially the highest level in Canada.
Yes. No.
Right?
And I'm not saying it didn't exist.
Right. Yeah.
I'm saying,
sure.
Okay. In the context, my further point is going to be, yes, there was institutional racism in Canada.
Yeah.
I don't think it exists today. I mean, there could be some specific examples still, but I think in large part it's gone. And I would say that the reason that we still have churches that typically center around a certain ethnic group, whether, you know, in our context, that's Dutch immigrants, Dutch Canadians, or it's, you know, if you go in Toronto, there's lots of Chinese type churches, all sorts of different communities based around immigration, right? Yeah. Like that's a very common human trait. And that's why intersectionality works so well, because it's very easy, because you find a tribe and we like that tribe.
We mindset. Like tribalism. That's right.
Very much like tribe mindsets. And on the Indigenous issue, especially, you also have the factor of geography there too. with reserves.
Right.
So like you're going to have, there's lots of like, there's a real big evangelical indigenous movement.
Yeah.
And,
Sure.
but they all have their own churches too.
Yeah.
So like you wouldn't go in there and be like, you guys are racist. You don't have any white people in your church. Like, well, no white people live around here.
Yeah.
Or
So
like,
just,
but they can't be racist.
before we get into the weeds, I want to just define tribalism for someone who hasn't heard that before. It's basically just the tendency for people to group together with people that are similar to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So
which is not necessarily a bad thing.
It's not necessarily. If you think of the tribal days, people would group together with people who are like them for safety for security, tactic. Stability, all that. And to a certain extent, it's something that is inherent in us.
The church does that.
The church does that.
Christians gather around Christians.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. You are the company you keep, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There are proverbs about these things.
Yeah. But racism takes that and says, essentially one tribe is better than the other. Right.
Yeah.
Because of our innate characteristics.
Well, okay. Maybe not even though. It's just like I don't fault like Chinese Canadians for starting their own churches and having mostly Chinese churches. It's not, there's nothing preventing me from going to.
But how much of that is that we've kind of imbibed this idea that they can't be racist? So like,
no, but I don't fault white churches for that. There's no sign on the door being like, or even any sort of stigma. Wow.
Well, when we look at our churches, we've done this on our podcast. Like we've said, well, if you look around the church, there's not that much racial diversity, or there's not that much like
true
diversity. And one of the things that we often think as King Reformed churches, and maybe it's just because we're Dutch white people in general, we are like, let's strive for diversity. But we would never look at a black church and say, well, hey, you're lacking diversity here. Like, what's going on? You celebrate the black church as like, you know what? They have their heritage. Good for them. Right?
Yeah.
And no one's like, well, good for us for having our Anglo-Genevan Psalter, right? They're like, well, why don't we adopt more blackness, which is what I'm using all these crazy D'Angelo words, but like, why don't we move away from our whiteness and find our blackness? It's right.
Just a side point. It's interesting how you're using words from Robin DiAngelo, who's supposed to be this great, like
I'm doing it on purpose.
Great savior of the black people, and these terms sound so racist.
Yeah, 100%. Well, no, like she's terrible. She said she's trying to get rid of her whiteness in her.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's just like. So right,
you raise a good point.
It's so unchristian. It's like like why would you try to get rid of something about yourself that God made? That just doesn't make sense to me.
But
right off the bat,
the problem comes when you start holding on to that as more important than being made in the image of God, right?
Right. Which obviously they don't even have that framework. So for her, it's not getting rid of it.
Yeah, sure.
It's like.
Yeah, but I mean, as churches, as fellow believers, we all believe in the same God. When you start holding on to your, let's say, white Dutch heritage as being more important, and it's not something that anyone would acknowledge consciously, it's kind of a subconscious thing. You start elevating it to a point where it shouldn't be.
Yeah, if it gets in the way of sharing the gospel,
right?
Or bringing people of different races into your church.
That's the potential danger of celebrating heritage.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But we would never criticize. I mean, obviously, we wouldn't criticize. We would be hesitant to criticize even people in our church. We'd be hesitant to criticize people like that. What you said is like it's unconscious, or it's you wouldn't say, well, you're just saying you just love our Dutchness because you love Dutchness.
Yeah.
And maybe in the same way, we just don't criticize black churches for not being diverse in the same loving manner, where we're like, well, they are.
Well, you make a good point, because we do imbibe the cultural hegemony argument a bit, because like we do say like, oh yeah, like white churches should be more diverse. And
I was backpedaling.
but we kind of accept this kind of narrative, right?
Well, I would say that you can't. There's something to diversity in our churches.
No, but diversity is a good thing. Diversity.
But do we view our churches as, this is like, I do not
diversity within the church is a good thing.
Yes. But this isn't where I thought we'd be.
Because you get different experiences and different backgrounds, and it helps foster a more fulsome faith. Because if you're just getting it from one side, like one set of experiences, And it's not this is to my earlier point
very
here.
D'Angelo-ish. All right.
This is to my earlier point though. It's not, I don't
Lived
blame
experience, man.
Yeah, but like that's a factor.
Fair. Okay.
Yeah.
No, keep no, we're cool.
Yeah. Like I don't blame different churches for having churches that are largely one ethnicity because of our tribal instincts. Is it the ideal? No, it's not the ideal. But is it very understandable that in a country that's very much created on immigration, that, you know, whatever it is, 3 generations later, your church is still gonna be pretty similar? It's like, that's pretty understandable because it takes a while to kind of branch out. So like in our circumstances, like, yeah, we're slowly diversifying and that's good. And I hope other immigrant groups in Canada too, that have churches that are largely one type of ethnicity. Like if you can get past the different theological differences, like if you can find common ground, like say there was a reformed, could we like Reformed church in Toronto, like Bethel, if there's a Reformed Chinese church next door and you're both like operating separately and you're both like, you literally believe the same things, you have the same confessions, but you haven't hooked up. It's like, why wouldn't you like get your churches
Which is what,
to communicate?
It's a lot of what we talk about. Like,
but we should be fair to our federation. Like we have, you know, Korean fellowship relationships with the Korean church there.
100%
church relationships.
I mean, there's effort there. And I think I'm curious. Like, this is getting very, is it epistemological? Am I using that right?
That's how you know things. So
yeah, this is like very deep, very deep.
Depends what
level.
you say next.
Yeah, I see. That's fair enough. No, I'm just thinking this is like a very deep level analysis, but I'm curious if it's like part of what we have imbibed is something of this idea that because we're white, we should go out of our way to accept other races and cultures into our churches. And I wonder how we view that overall, if we view that subconsciously even as us doing the other race a favor. Like, you know, like we're still imbibing this like white supremacy idea where like, well, now we have the truth. Let's go give it to everyone else. Which is like, as Christians, it's like, yeah, Paul had the truth. He went out and gave it to everyone else. But interesting, I actually heard today that he had a very targeted group too. He was like, I'm not going to the Jews. I'm going to go to the Gentiles. Yeah. Like, whoa, that's racist, right? Which it was like, kind of was. But I'm curious if we like imbibe that a little bit, like we are the white people with the truth. Let's go find some black people we can share with. Like, this is just obviously very general, like, not saying that it's white versus black.
That's what we do.
I just wonder if that's a subconscious thing.
That's what we do in mission. Like we had Pastor Ian on like a couple episodes back. It's like we're picking people in this area and we're saying these are poor people living in Weston and we're going to go do mission them. Or, you know, we target people in Brazil or in Papua New Guinea. Right.
But I would say like the act of mission is intentional. And I think that kind of controls for a little bit of that. So that if you're going to do mission in Brazil, you're not just going to go there because they're of a different race. You're going to go there because of a list of factors. Because they don't know the gospel. Right. But you're going to go there from a list of factors that, you know, you've determined that, you know, God's calling you here because of, you know, X, Y, and Z. Whereas in general in our churches, it's not just up to a mission board to analyze who we should be reaching out to. It's up to every individual member to say, you know, we should be reaching out to these people. So I wonder as churches if it's different. Yeah. We're way too deep here. This is like,
yeah, it depends on what your focus is with your mission work. If your mission work is like, okay, our church is too white, we've got to find some black people to diversify our church. Well, your mission work is focused on identity then, on like a non-biblical identity.
Yep. But now if you want to target a low-income neighborhood,
well, that
like if you want to go like Jane and Finch in Toronto,
like targeted missions,
avoid that.
Yeah, they don't need the gospel.
Safety.
Targeted missions, in a certain sense, might be useful, might be worthwhile.
All missions are pretty targeted, though.
Almost right. You have to be able to give your mission work a focus for it to be effective. Yeah. But if your mission work is specifically focused on identity because your church isn't diverse enough, I might say you're not focusing on the gospel enough. You're focused on someone's identity,
totally,
right?
Totally.
So,
man, it's pretty hard to argue. I don't know. I would say too, but like,
so I don't think we imbibe that.
No,
to use your word, imbibe.
No, I wouldn't.
For the 8th time.
I guess I got that stuck in my head.
So someone should get the imbibe count going for Tyler. It's the imbibe watch over here.
That's got to be 5 for you.
Joel and Bob here.
Yeah, maybe it's not quite as prevalent or something that I'd be concerned about. But yeah, I'm always on alert. Like it raises red flag with me whenever somebody uses one metrics of like, oh, we see, X amount of black people versus white people in the church. Right away, it's like, okay, why are you identifying that as the matrix of success? Right.
Yeah.
And so I said that we had the same thing. Our first episode was Jason. We talked about Christian education, and if it's like if you think your metrics of success is growth in a school, or you think it is multiculturalism, then that's like you're straying from the vision of why that was created.
Right.
And I think the same thing with the church is like, you're not there to be multicultural. You're not there to have, a diverse group. You're there because, you are the body of Christ.
Yep.
But, also the church and, I heard this heaven is going to look a lot different than what our churches look like.
Sure.
Interesting. So it's like, there's just not going to be white people. It's not going to be like just white Dutch people.
Right.
So maybe we should make our, there's an argument to be made. Maybe we should make our churches look more like heaven.
So did you have a point?
Oh, go ahead.
So it is interesting going back to where this part of the discussion started, Martin Luther King Jr.'s statement of the most divided time in America. It is interesting also to pull in to that culture of different races, because different races do have different cultures, and how different cultures respond to, for example, different music and different worship styles.
Yeah.
Now I do not know enough about this to talk authoritatively on it at all, but it is interesting because that could factor into why people go to a certain church.
Mm-hmm. No, totally. For sure. Totally. Comfort level.
Yeah. Comfort level.
For sure. We even have that amongst our churches.
Yeah.
Like if you like a more, I gotta be very careful how I word this, but if you like a more relaxed or upbeat, maybe upbeat might not be the right word, but if you're looking for a slightly different take on dynamic, just type of worship service, then you might consider, like, it depends what you like. If you like more, I'll say it maybe conservative or liberal approach to church. It's not bad or good.
Hey,
just two different things.
That yet, so
if you're in the Hamilton area, you might consider going to Blessings, perhaps, or you might consider going to Cornerstone. You might consider going to any of these other churches because they have different styles.
Yeah.
And then let's just be frank, like people choose churches like that a lot, like because there used to be this idea of different territories for churches, and like you're in this area, you go to this church. But that's pretty much gone by the wayside. People just go to the church they prefer. So I don't know where I was going with that point, but I just wanted to say that out loud. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Real Talk. If you'd like to send us some feedback, you can email us at reformedrealtalk@gmail.com. If you want to find us online, go to realtalkpodcast.ca. If you're looking for us on social media like Facebook or Instagram, or if you want to find us in your favorite podcast app, just search Reformed Real Talk, and we should come up. We look forward to your feedback, as that is what helps us grow and improve as podcast hosts. This show, Real Talk, is produced by myself, Lucas Hopelure, and Tyler Vanderwood. Photo and video credits go to Tim Van Woodberg from Timeless Photography. Theme music was produced by Calvin Hutten. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed and that you were informed and inspired. And please keep having real conversations. Till next time, bye-bye.